permitted, everyone should study abroad. This summer, we had the chance to go on our grand tour of England. The grand tour, being a tradition that people observe once they receive their formal education, is meant to enlighten travelers about the various things they can learn about themselves, about the environments they live in, and the social structures they are a part of. The English have been going on their grand tour to see what is considered beautiful and discover their history in Italy and Greece, like Lucy, in A Room with a View. We are privileged to go on our grand tour. There are several reasons to travel. In Chapter 2, Miss Lavish says, "One doesn't come to Italy for niceness," was the retort. "One comes for life." We expect to see particular things that Lucy did as a tourist, but by the end of our journey, we are forced to come of age with stricken with new obstacles. The novels we were exposed to enriched our experiences, allowed the places we ventured to become more meaningful so we could glean a lot from it. Being able to shift your worldview will take you far in life. Just like the characters in the novels we read, we met people we never thought we could remotely connect with, discovered history that taught us about the origins of many modern-day cultures, and formed brand new interpretations and perceptions about beauty. Beauty of a place, of its architecture, of its scenery, and of its people. We are leaving London wiser, independent, and open-minded as global citizens because of the novels we read and the sights we experienced.
Jimi Hendrix once said, "Knowledge speaks, but wisdom listens." I find this quote to mirror what we have accomplished during our time in London. Each week, we have been fortunate to visit sites that have helped us gain a better understanding for each book we have read. In Jane Eyre, our protagonist Jane grows up parentless and is eventually placed in a boarding school for orphans. Seeing firsthand just what the orphans at the Family Museum went through gave me a greater appreciation for Jane and allowed me to connect with her more emotionally. It was heartbreaking to see that some of the children's only possessions were tokens left by their parents to remember them. Despite her situation, Jane was able to overcome her circumstances through education and a passion for success. As she says, "For it was true wisdom that showed me the right path to follow." Our trip to Christ Church College at Oxford also left me with a sense of noticeable self-growth. After reading Brideshead Revisited and going to see the great dining hall in person, I felt that I was surrounded by some of the greatest thinkers of all time. People like William Penn, Lewis Carroll, and Albert Einstein. These are just a few of the portraits that surround the hall as some of the university's brightest minds eat their meals. In our final week, we paid a visit to the V&A Museum, which featured an exhibit on the iconic band Pink Floyd. This trip, paired with our reading of Buddha of Suburbia, opened my eyes to some of the greatest changes Britain has gone through in the 1970s and 80s. The book deals with the dislike between different races and classes in London. In Kareem's words, London seemed like a house with 5,000 rooms, all different. The kick was to work out how they connected and eventually walk through them all. I find Kareem's description relevant even today, and his words of wisdom has helped me further embrace the diversity in my surroundings. In fact, I read a line or two that I was especially able to learn from in many of these books. Like Robbie, in the book Atonement. Literature helped him become regarded as a wise old bird. We too can become wise old birds reading some of history's greatest texts. My time here in London and throughout Europe has taught me to expand my mind as a thinker and engage better as a listener, just as Mr. Hendricks said. However, we have yet to mention one of the oldest forms of sharing wisdom, art. Luckily, we have been fortunate to be surrounded by so many marvelous collections of art to interpret.
Other than the wisdom we have gained, this class abroad has forced us into becoming independent. Jane Eyre became a visage of independence by breaking the expectations of readers about her path down her journey. People expect her to marry Rochester after the first proposal, but she refuses to be another mistress. St. John expects her to move to India with him, but she understands that her lack of love for him would make them both miserable. Her travels and education help her look at her situations from a more mature standpoint because of the independence she has gotten. This maturity allows her to make decisions that carry a much wider moral scope than before. She forgives her aunt and eventually sees Rochester's true love for her rather than this desire to make her his mistress. The progression made it clear to us how travel helps people see situations from different perspectives and make more decisions. The caged bird portrait and the Tate Museum helped me comprehend the dangers of being narrow-minded and remaining in closed-off environments. If Jane did not leave the school in Thornbury, she would have not received the wisdom she carried from her travels. Instead, she would have been left to live a life she hated. Similarly, we have taken the lessons from the caged bird portrait and made it applicable to our lives. Willfully remaining in Texas, or the Texas mindset I carried before traveling here, would have blinded me from a point of view I never knew I could have.
In Jane Eyre, you learn that too often people look for happiness from an outside source, whether it be people or things, but Jane shows how you can achieve happiness through independence. Helen Burns taught her this before dying. She said, "If all the world hated you and believed you wicked, while your own conscience approved you and absolved you from guilt, you would not be without friends," found on chapter 8. Jane learning this was the start of her learning to seek her happiness internally, and through this you see her become much happier than she was earlier on.
As a grown-up, Jane is now a free-roaming bird. When Jane is proclaiming her love and is convinced Rochester will not marry her, he states, "Jane, be still. Don't struggle so, like a wild, frantic bird that is rending its own plumage in its desperation." And she responds, "I am no bird, and no net ensnares me. I am a free human being with an independent will, which I now exert to leave you." In comparison to the bird lying limp in the corner being held down by a snarling cat, Jane has finally broke free and is no longer in cage. In contrast to Mustafa, Eric, and Christo as a female, I could have felt caged like Jane Eyre. Traveling to London, I was apprehensive about not having my father to look after me, but I was forced to be independent. I can now successfully say I know how to take the tube, hail a taxi, and book a flight without depending on a man to do it for me.
While reading A Room with a View, we learned how traveling teaches you to jump out of your comfort zone. This is something we see occurring in Lucy's travels as well. For good or for evil, Lucy was left to deal with her problem alone, found in chapter 5. Lucy was living in her comfort zone before witnessing the murder, but once the murder pushed her out of her comfort zone, she started thinking for herself and eventually decided to give up her family to chase love.
Meeting Graham Zeitland in the Imperial War Museum, I was constantly comparing our childhood to his. He really helped me put into perspective how spoiled our generation is. He was 10 years old during the war and had to seek shelter from air raids. All while this was happening, he carried on as normal. He said,
"The local shops didn't sell decent ice cream, so I would cycle 10 miles to buy an ice cream."
"Oh my goodness."
But it made the ice cream taste so much better. I really am grateful that I had to make an effort to get something. I think
So you appreciate it
it
more.
set me up for life. Now if I want something, I don't think, who can I ask? I do it myself, or I did. Not getting a bit past it now, but that was my life.
When we return home, we will be more independent. Studying abroad also forces you to become open-minded. You see, I didn't ask much of life. This was the extent of my longing. But at least my goals were clear, and I knew what I wanted. I was 20. I was ready for anything. This quote from the Buddha of Suburbia mirrors all of our expectations, similar to Kareem. We had to keep an open mind traveling to London, as we read novels of characters different from us and experienced a new culture. In contrast to Kareem, we didn't all know what we want.
One of the experiences that made me open-minded is when Lex and I visited the chapel in Christ Church, Oxford. It was intriguing for me to experience the Mass as a non-believer. It was a strange spiritual experience, but I feel that I have a newfound respect for Christianity. That reminds me of a lot of the novel Brideshead Revisited. Charles' cousin Jasper warned him, "Be aware of the Angelo Catholics. They are all sodomites with unpleasant accents. In fact, steer clear of all the religious groups. They do nothing but harm." Through his experiences with Sebastian and his family, he was skeptical about the nature of Catholicism. Some people might not represent a certain religion well enough. Without me visiting the chapel, my views could not have changed. Seeing the similarities between how Catholics worship at Mass and how Muslims worship in a mosque opened my eyes to a new view on religion. In the Mass, I was a human, and I saw others as a human as well. Titles no longer matter in this context. Upon returning to Texas, I will no longer feel different or aligned, but will feel closer to those around me because of the experiences I witnessed at Mass.
When visiting the Museum of London, there is a painting that shows perfectly why we need to be taught about the struggles minorities had to face in order to gain equality. This painting was of the Atlantic pub in Brixton that was known for the bartenders breaking glasses that colored people drank out of. This pub was one of the first ones attacked in the Brixton race riots in 1981. Through hearing about how close-minded people were so recently and reading about the struggles Kareem experiences with racism makes you know why it is so important that we spend time learning about the history of racism to put an end to it. Reading about how terrible Kareem feels for having to change who he is to fit the Indian stereotype shows people how wrong it is to exploit people for their race. Being a white male, I never had to deal with being discriminated against because of the color of my skin or being forced to act in a way that confirms the stereotype.
Analyzing these novels and venturing to various sites taught us a lot about ourselves. We all have different interpretations of the same text, and it is the same way when you are put in a new situation or country. The connection we have formed with Europeans and the places we have seen in Europe have helped us understand how we are even across borders and how our differences can bind us. No matter where we go, we will form some sort of connection with the people we meet and the spaces we occupy, as well as elicit the ability to adapt to unfamiliar situations with more favor than before. That is what the TC mission statement is all about, to educate individuals to think and act as ethical leaders and responsible citizens in the global community. Over the past years, we would hear the mission statement as a repeated slogan but never really understood what it entailed. We received our education through the novels we read and sites we saw. We became ethical leaders making decisions that challenged what we grew up to believe our entire lives. And we demonstrated as American students how we could act as responsible citizens in the global community by connecting with Europeans on the most personal level possible. No longer is it just a mission statement to us, but a way of life.